What's up, my friends? Welcome back to another video. And today we are going to go over a very simple method for lush and rich string chords. I think string orchestration is something that a lot of beginner composers are more intimidated by because the process seems a little bit daunting. There's like so many different parts. How do we actually arrange them all together, in a cohesive and full way? And so I want to tackle exactly this in today's video. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll get a really good sense of a framework you can follow for yourself as well. Before we do that, I want to give you a free guide all about my favorite string arrangement techniques. I call this the 4 steps to lush string arrangements. And in here, not only do we talk about how to create lush chords, but it's all about good practices, good solid techniques that you can use on a consistent, repeatable basis to create those full string arrangements that you usually hear in scores like Disney or John Williams or whatever it may be. There are some certain principles and techniques that are very, very fundamental that you should follow to kind of establish and guarantee those results every time. So I want to give that to you totally free. You can click the first link in the description box below and it'll take you straight there and you can download that right away. And at the very end of the video, I have a super special announcement for something that just launched today. So stick around for that and I'll give you more details at the very end. So without further ado, let's kind of dive into the topic of the foundations of lush string chords, right? So before we really dive in, let me just show you here. We have the Cinematic Studio strings patches, violins, 1 violins, 2 violas, cellos, and basses. And very traditionally, most orchestras, symphony orchestras will have these 5 dedicated sections. Now, if you think about that, that basically means that there are 5 unique voices that we can use for our chord, right? So we're thinking in the Western context of major minor chords, for example. Of course, you can go with more extensions and sus chords and things like that. But just for the sake of simplicity, let's talk about major chords or minor chords. Every triad has a root, a third, and a fifth. So 3 notes within a triad. How do we spread those over 5 different voices? Or in this case, 5 different string sections, right? Or string families. Well, my go-to principle is to follow the harmonic series. What is that, you may ask? Well, it's essentially a rule to tell you that when you go lower in the frequency spectrum in terms of notes and sound, the overtones that certain low notes create, they tend to overlap very easily. And so they create a very muddy sound when they're too closely paired up together in the low registers. Whereas in the higher registers, because the overtones are much fewer because of the way sound works, you can have closer notes together being played at the same time, and it will sound a lot clearer and a lot more consonant. So this harmonic series essentially gives us a guideline of how far we can set our intervals within our chord, the distances between each of those notes. So the general rule of thumb here is wider intervals at the very bottom to prevent that muddiness and leave a nice gap. Whereas as you continue up the keyboard or up the piano, you can then let the intervals become smaller and smaller because the sound is less muddied up there, right? So I love to use a piano to test things out. And this is a great sketching tool for most purposes, most mock-ups, whatever instruments or orchestrations you decide to go with. Using the piano is a great way to test out things that might work or might not work. So let me show you this piano program here, ChordieApp. You've probably seen me use it before, but let's say I want to arrange a D major chord. Okay, so D major, right? So the thing about a piano is that you can play multiple notes at once. So many notes. Like with a pedal here, I have it depressed and I've played all these notes of the D major chord. There must be like, I don't know, 15 here, right? So the problem is when it comes to arranging it for an actual ensemble, you don't have that many voices, or usually limited to fewer voices, right? In this case, we're trying to arrange this D major chord down to 5 unique voices. So we also have to think of from that perspective when we're trying to sketch this out on the piano as well. So following the harmonic series, we know we only have, in this case, 5 voices for our chord because we have 5 distinct sections. So how are we going to space out those intervals for this chord? Well, if I want the double basses, which are the lowest string instrument family, if I want that to be, let's say, settled on a low D below the staff, that's totally fine. I could even start the double basses up here, even though that's higher up in the range. So let's just say we're going to go with the lower D here. Then for the cellos, which are the next section up, they play higher than the double basses. I have a couple of choices. I could have them play the exact same notes, so I could have them double the double basses in unison, which could work, but it kind of wastes one of the voices. I would rather use the cellos to play a different voice to fill out the chord a little bit more. So I can then go with maybe the D an octave above, which would then be playing a unique note, right? It could also play an A, which is the fifth above the D, or I could play the F sharp, which is the third of the chord, the D major chord. The problem with the F sharp is just that it's so close to the D already, and the fact that we're kind of low in the keyboard, right? So you hear how muddy this actually sounds, right? According to the harmonic series, anything kind of below, let's say the C3 register, you want to have intervals larger than, let's say, a sixth, a seventh, or an octave. So the safest bet here is to go with a double tonic note. So we have the basses playing the D here, the D2, then we have the cello playing the D3, and then that leaves the violas, it leaves the violins 2 and violins 1. So if we already have 2 root notes, maybe we can then add in a third or a fifth to complete the chord. So what do we want the violas to play? Well, it could play the fifth, or they could also play the third. They both sound pretty decent, right? Notice this D to F sharp sounds fine because it's higher up on the keyboard, so the harmonic series allows us to kind of use that interval a bit more easily without it sounding muddy. So if we went with the F sharp here for the violas, then that already establishes a third of the chord. So now we hear that major sound, which means the violins 2 would probably want to finish the chord by adding in the fifth, in this case A. So we have double basses, cellos, violas, violins 2, and then just to finish things off, why don't we just use violins 1 on the high, or on the D above middle C, so C4, or D4, sorry. So we have 5 unique voices, we have 3 roots, we have 1/3 and 1/5. And according to traditional doubling rules, in really any major chord or minor chord, the root has the most easy doubling capabilities without the chord sounding muddy. Whereas the third, if you have too many thirds in there, then it sounds a little more muddy, right? But if you have the root doubled multiple times, it just establishes that home foundation a little bit more easily. It doesn't really clog up the chord too much. So this is a pretty traditional chord voicing, and if we try to put that in the strings, let's give it a shot. So with the double basses, I'm going to play that D that we just played. Let's try this out. So it would be... There we go. Let's copy that up into the cellos. And of course, this is going to be up an octave. So let's hear what that sounds like. You know what? I'm actually going to put in some modulation data here because it's a little bit loud. So we'll say 74. That's totally fine. Oops, not volume. Let's go with modulation. Yeah, I'm just going to record it in really quickly here. There we go. So one modulation is that. That's about 39. Let's actually raise it up a bit to match double basses. Yeah, around the 80 mark, right? Let's take that, put it up into the violas. And the violas, we're playing the F sharp. So F sharp, there we go. And then we were putting the next part up into the violins 2, which was playing an A. And then finally, let's put it up into the violins 1, which is playing the D above middle C. So there, and let's check. A up to the D. So let's have a listen to this chord. And there we go. So let's hear that chord one more time. Right? It's basically like a D sandwich. There's like D on the top and the bottom, then there's another D there, so there's 3 Ds, then we get the root and the fifth. And just having that chord, those 5 notes, already creates a nice, full, rich sound. Let's try out one more voicing. So let's say we want one with a larger scope, a larger range. So let's say we want the double basses super low, just like we did originally, but let's have the violins 1 all the way up here. Okay, so now we get a nice gap between those 2 extremes. And how do we fill the other 3 voices in? So we need the third and we need the fifth somewhere. In this case, why don't we establish the third maybe an octave and a half or so, or an octave and a quarter above the low D. So this can give us a nice rich sound here because the third of the chord gives us that nice full sound, and it also tells us the quality of the chord, if it's major or minor. So when you have the F sharp kind of in the middle here, it fills out both sides of these extremes very nicely. Then the fifth has a bit less of an impact on the chord. So why don't we just put that in up here to fill up? So we have those high and low Ds, then we have the F sharp here, let's say in the cellos. Then the violas could basically play this A here to fill in the fifth. So now you get a nice spacing between those chords. And then where should we put the violins too? Well, let's just put them on another root. So we get this. So a little wider of a gap at the top. Then you get this fifth, which again doesn't have that much impact in the middle there. But this F sharp is super heavy and really just blends very well with the rest of the chord. So let's rearrange that for the strings. So we have the low D, which is the same as before. The cellos here should be F sharp. Then we have the A, right? And the violas, and then the violins 2. And then the violins 1 are basically 2 octaves higher. So the overall spacing looks like this. And notice that, yeah, the double basses and cellos look really close together, but that's because the double basses actually sound 1 octave lower than written. So don't worry too much about that. In reality, it's actually more like this, right? But for the sake of the sound of this library, this is how it looks. So have a quick listen to this. Right? So kind of similar to the first one, except it sounds wider, a bit more expansive, and that's just because of the way we voiced this second chord. So a general rule of thumb is if it sounds good on the piano, then it will most likely sound good in the orchestral instruments as well, particularly the strings. When you have 5 voices, you're kind of limited here. So you really have to think about the voicing style you're going for. And again, if you want that full and rich sound, then you want to follow the harmonic series, having wider intervals at the top, at the bottom. So it could be like an octave, it could be like a 10th, or it could be up to like a 12th when you have a big gap at the bottom. So that gives us a lot of room to work with for the upper register. So if we have this nice 12th at the top, at the bottom, then we can put the third above that. Then we could put another root maybe, and then we have that high D to finish. Or maybe you want an A on the melody instead. So maybe you have the root, then you have the third, then you have another root, and then you have maybe another root here, and then we have the A on the top, which is the fifth. You know, so a slightly different voicing there. But the way I like to think about voicing chords in general is where are my violins 1 going to be, and where are my double basses going to be? Where are the extremes going to lie? Because that in general will basically limit me down to the last 3 voices, the remaining 3 voices, and how I should voice those within those extreme ranges. So if I know the violins 1, right? If I know they're going to be playing a third of the chord, then that kind of eliminates the third from the rest of the chord, because again, the third is a very heavy note in the chord. So if the violins 1 are playing the chord and the double basses are playing the D here, then I basically have Ds and As to work with, unless I want another third in there to make it heavier. But a default voicing I might go with is this. So double basses, violins 1, maybe I'll do cello here, then I might do an A, and then I might do a D here. Let's see. Right, a little more open there. Or we could also do this. We could take the A and actually move it up an octave. So that's a little more root heavy at the bottom with those Ds, but then that A and the F sharp at the very top makes it sing a little bit easier as well. So just to try that out, let's see what that sounds like. So we have 3 Ds an octave apart. D, D, let's check. We'll bring this back down to a D. Then the violas, back down to the D. Then we get the A, and then we get the F sharp. So it looks like this, right? And again, the double basses and the cello are currently on the same note, but the double basses sound an octave lower. So you have 3 Ds, then you have the A, then the F sharp, 3 roots, then the fifth, and then the third at the top. Oops, sorry about that. One more time. Right. That's also a different voicing style, but it sounds a little bit more open because the third of the chord is actually at the very top. So the middle of the chord's a bit more hollow because we don't have the third in the middle. But yeah, it ultimately depends on what you want the ranges to be. What's the harmonic foundation going to be, and what kind of octave, what kind of register do you want that to be in, and then what do you want the melody to be doing? What do you want the upper line to be doing? Because again, then you can fit the remaining three voices within those two ranges, and then voice that appropriately depending on the type of sound you're going for. So you just have to know what chord you're writing, of course. Like in this case, I was trying to arrange a D major chord the whole time, and then I decide, okay, I establish what position I'm in. Am I in root position, first inversion, second inversion? That determines my bass note for the double basses. Then I think about the melody. Do I want the melody to be playing a root third or fifth? And what register, what octave is it going to be playing in? And then I follow the harmonic series to arrange the remaining three voices to make sure it's nice and open and resonant. Hope that that kind of makes sense, because this concept basically applies for this entire context in a fuller piece of music, like a full ballad or an emotional piece where you have those lush string chords playing the whole time. You want to make sure the voicings are nice and resonant and open, because then there are other instruments probably playing on top and you don't want them to be fighting with each other, So the way you voice this is super important. So just keeping in mind the harmonic series and determining your upper and lower ranges first. For me, that's the perfect workflow, because then I can move from there and have a very stable foundation to work off of. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. And I did promise you a special announcement at the very beginning. And this is that my newest course, Expressive String Arranging, is currently available. This course took me a few months to put together, but it's essentially my complete start to finish framework for how to arrange, write, orchestrate, and mock up string passages in your DAW. So it's basically broken up into like three modules. There's like the basics of the string section. You go over the idiomatic things. There's articulations. We go over the very basics. Then we cover expressive string arranging techniques. So how to create rich chords just like this, how to make them flow very easily, how to create convincing string passages. I'll show you examples and listening examples. And then module 3 goes into specific DAW techniques that we need to know to create those convincing results with sampled instruments as well. It's a super comprehensive system. I've had students go through it already and get some amazing results, and I'd love to see you inside there as well. It's currently available for intro pricing. At the end of this week, it will go up in price, so I would love to have you on the inside before it goes up to its regular price. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions about it. I'd love to see you inside. And thanks again for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Take care and have fun with string writing. See you then. Bye-bye.